community, and we're going to talk about podcasting. Duh! So this is our podcasting roundtable. Welcome. If you guys are watching, there's a chat box, and we are going to be taking questions. I'm going to kind of just be the moderator tonight because you guys hear from me enough. And we're going to hear from 3 other lovely podcasters from the group. So if you have questions, stick them in the chat box, and I will pepper them in as kind of it makes sense for the conversation. So we're going to get started with like kind of little introductions. So I would love to hear, we'll start with Marianne, who you are and what your podcast is, and just kind of like a little elevator pitch for it. So Marianne, take it away.
All right. So my name is Marianne Rest, and as you can tell, I have an accent. So I'm originally from Germany. So if you can't quite understand what I'm saying, just send me an email and I explain. So my podcast is called Sustainable Living Podcast. And what else did you want to know, Kristen? Just who we are? What our
just
podcast
kind of a little
is?
Tagline, elevator pitch for your podcast, and then we'll get into
So
deeper
we
questions.
basically talk about just about any kind of topic having to do with sustainable living. So that could be on a physical level, like raising chickens or eating healthier food, or it could be on an emotional level, practicing yoga and meditation and things about inner sustainability. And then on a world level, to pollute less and all of those kind of things. So it's pretty open, but anything centered around living a sustainable life.
Excellent. I love it. And let's go ahead and move on to Matt, who is our community wizard. You guys probably recognize his, tiny. You usually see him in like a tiny little image, all of us really, in our profiles as we talk in Facebook. But here we are, big screen. Matt, tell us who you are and your podcast.
Yeah, my name is Matt McCarrick, and I am the community wizard for creative writing, and have become friends with Kirsten over some. See, I already messed it up. I said, Chris, my wife.
The whole
is
thing's
named,
over. We're shutting it down right now.
Yes, my wife is named Kristen, and also
I can totally forget.
So I always am focusing that with, even when I'm talking to my wife, I'm like, don't call her Kirsten, don't call her Kirsten. So anyway, so I've become friends with Kirsten over this last year. And my podcast is the One Verse Devotional, and it's a faith-based podcast, and it's 5-minute podcast-ish. I say 5-minute-ish, 5 to 7 minutes usually. And we just focus on the idea, it's 5 days a week for 5 minutes. And it's all based on the idea that I believe you can grow deeper in your faith through small baby steps or really small disciplines. So the whole idea behind the podcast is that I help you open God's word, spend time with God, whether you're, doing the laundry or the dishes or working out or driving to work, just for 5 minutes, and we look at just one verse every day, Monday through Friday, to grow a little bit deeper in our faith. But I believe you can grow deeper in your faith doing that versus what I used to always do, and still probably struggle with at times, where I'll go a week or a month and be like, oh man, like I haven't read my Bible, so I'm gonna like dive in for like 2 hours. Well, just like working out physically, I'm sure Roland will talk about this a little bit, or could talk to this a little bit. Like I've done that as well, and I never ever get healthy by not working out, and then deciding to, go all out for like 2 hours once a month. That really doesn't do a lot for you. Well, the same is true in our faith. So that's where I focus on, try to be really honest and open, and just kind of share my life a little bit. You wouldn't think that you could share your life in 5 minutes, but over time you can. So I've been doing it for almost a year and a half, maybe a little bit shy of that, but I'm over 300 episodes now. So slowly growing and growing a following, and it's been a lot of fun.
Awesome. Well, Roland, now it's your turn to share who you are, Roland, and what your podcast is.
Yeah, I'm Roland Denzel, and I podcast with my wife. We write books, we blog, we cook, we do all sorts of fun stuff, all centered around health. So movement, healthy eating, and mindset, emotional eating, things like that. And like Matt says, with the baby steps, like that's our approach as well, as far as health and fitness goes. Few people got unhealthy just boom by one thing. It took lots of little things over many years. So while yes, it is faster to jump right in and just turn your life around overnight, it's not very sustainable, right? So we're going to bring all the buzzwords together, right? So it's not very sustainable for most people. So we teach people that every little step they can take, baby steps, really add up over time. And our podcast, if I didn't mention already, is called Eat, Move, Live 52 podcast. And 52 is for the weeks of the year, because there's so much you can accomplish in 1 year. You can establish a new healthy habit, or you can reacquaint yourself with home cooking. You can do all sorts of things if you just take a week to focus on it. It's 52 opportunities to do that in a year. So our podcast is focused on interviews with people that are, anything from some of our clients and some of our readers who've made big changes and we find inspiring, and we know that our other readers and listeners will find inspiring, but also health professionals, nutritionists, doctors, scientists, and practitioners of all sorts of things, eating, moving, and mindset related. And it's been a lot of fun. Our podcast is focused primarily on our current reading and listening audience. And for our clients, we do it sort of as a service, as an extra, sort of as a bonus feature for them, sort of like the extra features you'd find at the back of a CD. But we love when other people find us through our podcast as well.
Awesome. Well, as you guys can hear, we have 4 pretty different podcasts. I was trying to think of like a really cool name combining all of our names, but I came up with something that was really terrible. It was like Eat One Sustainable Writing. No, that doesn't really work. That would not work as a podcast. So 4 pretty, yeah, it probably is taken. It's very catchy. We've got 4 pretty different things here. And I know we all have different stories as to how we got into podcasting. I've shared mine already. It's, in the content library for the paid community. And I'd love to hear from you guys tonight. So I'm just going to get to listen to your stories. And Marian, I don't know if you want to get us started like with kind of the why behind, and maybe even just like a little bit of the backstory, like what was it that made you think podcast, I've got to go there, and kind of how did you the whole starting process, like picking up the tools to actually learn to do it and all that?
Sure. So for me, I used to be, or I still am, a very avid podcast listener, and I have been for years. And my family is kind of all over the world. So my sister lives in Italy, and she has a Google Hangout show. So for me, it kind of started with a Google Hangout because she had me on her show I talked about the Gerson therapy, which is a nutritional therapy I was doing with my husband at the time. And I was like, this is so much fun. And at the same time, I was a little bit active in a social media platform, which is defunct now. It was called Zoo, but it was like full of people with like very lofty and spiritual ideas and stuff like that. And I had we liked each other posts, a lady there, and I sent her a message and said, hey, I'm thinking about doing a podcast, but I don't want to do it alone. Would you like to join me? Or we were thinking podcast, Google Hangout. And she was like, yes, I've been wanting to do a podcast forever. And I was like, well, I'm not quite ready now. I was thinking, in half a year or something like that. And she just went ahead and started a website, and she got us on Libsyn and got everything set up. And so when I started out, I knew nothing about the tech side. And I just had the computer with built-in microphone. And I probably just had earbuds, or maybe I had headphones. I don't know. And so my co-host was doing all the posting, doing everything. And then her dad got very sick and consequently passed away. So we kind of, she was busy and I didn't know how to do anything. So I learned to do the tech side and have been growing ever since. So, and did you want to cover equipment now, or you want to
talk we'll come back to that. But I do want to know where you learned the tech side, because it's a big piece and it's a big pain.
It is a big pain. And so some of it my co-host showed me. She had a little bit more experience. It turns out that she's a social media marketer. So she knew a lot more about computers than I did. I'm more like, I know how to do the chicken stuff, and I know how to can, and I garden, and I do all of that stuff. And when we started out, it was just her and I talking. And then we went into also including interviews. So I needed to learn how to record them. So she told me about Ecamm and how to, get on Skype and do all of those things. And then I started to go on Facebook, and I learned so the She Podcast group a lot, and took a couple of different kinds, some paid, some not paid podcasting courses. And so I tend to immerse myself into things, like have all this information come to me, and it all sounds like a foreign language in the beginning, but then with time you get to go, oh, okay. Now I get it. So I wouldn't call myself a tech whiz yet at all, but give me another 2 years and I get it down. But each of us does our own editing and setting up interviews and all of that stuff. And I'm like more in the lead now on all of that for my co-host. So, it kind of goes back and forth. And to me, it's great to have a co-host, because when one of us is busy or live events happens, and the other one can pick up the slack. So
awesome. And are you guys in the same area, or are you kind of doing remote, like podcasting? Like you're not in the same room, right?
Yeah, remote. I'm in San Diego. We are both in California, but I'm in San Diego. She's in Big Bear. And we met in person 3 times now. So everything else a friendship really has developed via podcasting together online.
That's really neat. I feel like that we're in like this age of online friends where like 10 years ago, it was creepy if you met people online. And now it's like, oh yeah, that's my internet friend. Like it's like no big deal. Not a big deal. Well, I'm going to skip Matt for a second, because I'm curious, because I know Roland, you and your wife do the podcast together. So I'd like to skip to you and talk about how it works for you guys, because you are presumably in the same household. So like, how does your setup maybe different? Let's start with how you got started, and then you can talk to that too.
Well, it's funny because my first podcast experiences, I mean, I know a guy, everyone knows a guy, but I know this guy who in the fitness industry, at the time, he was a young kid, but now he's been doing a podcast for 11 years. And back then, people didn't know what podcasts were. And I knew him from back when forums were big, a fitness forum. And this story is going to come together in a second. And he posted on there, I had this crazy idea. I want to do this thing called a podcast. And people are like, I don't know. It sounds interesting. Interviews, things like that. But I thought, wow, that sounds like a really good idea. And I really wanted to support him. And we were having a fitness seminar in Little Rock, Arkansas. So people from this forum, like who are writing for this forum, giving advice, and also like the enthusiasts, traveled all over the place to go to this place. And so I met him there. So the story, like, it seems so weird. I was telling people, yeah, I'm going to Little Rock to meet all these people I've met on, I know from the internet. And it sounded so weird. But I got my podcast inspiration, from him. His name's Kevin, and he's got probably the biggest fitness podcast. It's called the Fitcast, and it's going on like 10 or 11 years now. It's a great podcast. And it's very professional, and he's really grown. And, he really kind of inspired me and my wife, Galina, to do it as well. So after we wrote our first book, after we had finished the book and we were kind of getting it ready to go, we decided, hey, let's start interviewing some of these people that we had talked about in our book. And it was purely out of, we wanted to teach people, but there was kind of like a thing of selfishness too, because wow, it's a great way to reach out to somebody and say, hey, would you like to be on my podcast? And back in the day, there weren't that many podcasts, so it was sort of a great icebreaker. Yeah, Matt, we're looking at you full time.
Yeah. Wait, I want to go back 1 second. Do you guys record, like, just a technical question? Do you guys record in the same room? Because I talked to somebody and they were like, we're in the same house and we're in different rooms. And I was like, okay, tell me how you guys work it out.
Yes. And it's actually more of a challenge to do that when you're sitting in the same room, because you either have to, like when you're doing it on Skype, it's pretty easy. It's two different channels. Everyone has headphones and you have a microphone, so there's really no echoing, things like that. But when you want to do it with two people in the same room, you either have to crowd around the same microphone, or you have to have extra audio equipment, mixers and things like that. So we do it the budget way. We have one nice microphone, and we make like a floor, like a pillow fort in the living room, sort of like soften the sound and soften the echo. And we get down on the floor. We're big floor sitters. Part of the health movement is like to sit on the floor more and avoid sitting on couches and chairs as much as possible, and kind of mix it up. So it makes a nice little thing. Plus, it's a lot less echoey down there, so it's nice. But we crowd around this thing, and we either do it where we're just talking. We do solos, like not solos, but we're the two of us where we're just talking back and forth on subjects. But we also interview people over Skype and Google Hangouts and things like that.
Awesome. I sit on the floor a lot, so people always look at me like I'm crazy, and so I'm going to tell them now it's for my health, you guys. Like that's
it is. It's good for the hips.
That's what I'm going to tell them. And the hips don't lie, as we all know.
That's right.
So I'm just going to go with that. I know I'm really interested. I'm going to be interviewing. I'm trying to get the date nailed down. John and Sherry Petersick from Young House Love has a podcast there from Young House Love. That's a decor blog that was huge for a lot of people that don't even like decor. I'm not even into decor. I just love them. But I'm interested in their setup because they do it in one room with, they have a condenser mic, which I think you'd probably have to have unless you're really like around, because I have a dynamic, and I think I want to do one with my husband. I think we'd both have to sit like right here. But they have it in the middle of like a child's table, and they sit on either side, but the sound is really good. So I'm interested to ask them what they do, but I feel like that would be a lot harder, just all the things. So yeah, the more things you add in, the more difficult the tech can be. So, okay. So Matt, let's talk to you. What got you started going the podcast route, and tell us a little bit about how you got started.
Sure. It's interesting to go back into my story and think back through it. It really started several years ago from, well, I had this idea. Okay, so I did videos first. I did videos for a long time. And so it's interesting now when I think back, because I guess I owe all of this to Gary Vee, but it was before Gary Vee was Gary. He was starting to become like, all I knew, I didn't even know his name. Like, I just remember hearing about this guy who, because he was doing his wine library. So it was way before he was into the actual marketing. It was just when he was starting to grow. I mean, we're talking like, years and years ago. And I heard about this guy who was doing these videos, and they were just really short, and fun, and just kind of sharing stuff. And I was like, man, that's interesting. He's doing that about wine. I mean, that's cool and all, but I'm like, I bet I could do that same thing with, for like faith. And I'm like, okay, if I have to just take it down, because he has one idea, I'm like, okay, well, what would one idea be? And that's where this whole idea of one verse came from. And I was like, well, as a Christian, we have very simple thoughts, in just one verse. And I literally remember just staring at the clock, and this all started off, I just kind of got away from this, but at first it was like one verse for 1 minute for one day. And so I just looked at this clock with a second hand and just kind of thought of a verse I knew. And I'm like, all right, let's do John 3:16. And I watched it and waited for it to get to the top. And then just on the fly was just like, okay, our one verse for today is John 3:16. And I quoted it, and then was like, so God really loves you, blah, blah, and said something like a blurb. And then I was done. And I'm like, man, I did that in a minute. I'm like, okay, that was my proof of concept. So literally that was an old job that I had, on my break. I was thinking about it. I'm like, oh, there's a clock on the wall. Let's test this idea.
This is stressing me out. The idea of sitting and podcasting with a clock winding down.
Yeah. So I was actually, I mean, I have a clock up every time I podcast. But we'll get to that in a second. But, so that was kind of just my test. I'm like, I think this will work. So I started a YouTube channel and did that. So I have, hundreds of videos out there, but as I'm from Indianapolis, Indiana. Then we moved, for a youth pastor job down to Birmingham, Alabama. Then we were there for 3 years, moved back to Indiana. And with all that change, it kept getting more and more difficult to do video. because I'd have to think through my studio space and where was it going to be. And at one point we had a house that I had a studio in the basement. So that worked out really well. Well, then we moved houses, and we actually, in that time, even in Alabama, we moved a couple different times in just those 3 years. Then moving back to Indiana, we rented for the first year because we didn't know where we wanted to live. And then we moved again. So we've moved like 5 times in 3 years or something like that. And so every time it got more and more difficult to do video, and we started having more kids. So it really came to about, the 2 years ago when I first started having the idea, and I was like, man, I was only shooting the videos at my dining room table. And so my wife would literally have to either I'd have to wait to get them down at nap time. If I try to do it at night, I really couldn't, because I'd have to set out all my lights, and I didn't have any natural lighting coming in. So that was difficult to do it all with false lights, or my wife would have to leave and take the girls. And I literally have to try and record a month and it was video. So I would literally have 5 or 6 changes of clothes laid out on my couch, and I would have it all mapped out for a month, and I would put a shirt on and do a Monday, a Tuesday, a Thursday, and a Friday. So I would be jumping around and not always have the same shirt on Mondays. And then I'd change shirts and do the next 5 and change shirts. Fortunately, I would have to batch them and have a whole month's done, but it just got to be so hectic. And I know video is kind of the it thing now, but video also takes a lot of time, and you'll hear the conversations between video and podcasting and the benefit of audio, especially that, for podcasts, you can be working out, you can be riding the bike, you can be running, doing the laundry, whatever, have it on the speakers while you're doing the dishes, whatever you want to do. And video, if you're watching a video, you really have to be just watching the video. And so I was like, okay, I've already kind of had a few years of practice of just doing this format and presenting it. And I just started thinking, for my time, the fact that, it doesn't matter what I look like. I don't have to change clothes. I don't have to set up lights. There was a learning curve, but then on the other side for people, it'll be better for them to be able to listen on their way to work and things like that. And so that's what really kind of inspired me to switch over. And I was nervous at first. I was scared. I didn't have a huge following, but I had, consistently every day, 50, 75, 100, 150 people showing up for my videos, which over time adds up. And even this, I don't even mind the small numbers. It's still the average church size in America is 110 people or less, I think, even now. So I have the average size church coming to my videos every single day. I'm not worried about the numbers. If I was in a room, sharing this information with people in a live room, I would be excited about that. So I think that's a whole nother conversation, but I think that's something easy to get caught up where it's oh, I don't have 1 million downloads. Well, think about it in real life. If you had 50 people in a room, or 100 people in a room, or 300 people in a room, you'd be like, man, this is awesome. And so that's really kind of what got me into podcasting. And then from there, it's actually kind of grown because it moved into and really influenced me starting some freelance work. And mostly I do copywriting, email marketing, things like that. But I've also done a lot of, podcast editing, just because I've done so many episodes. I've helped out Kirsten a little bit with that, but I can even talk about the in the room stuff, because not only do I have mine, my podcast is just me and this one microphone. It's plugged hardcore, or, hard lined into my, it's hardcore too. Don't get me wrong, but it plugs hard lined into my computer. I like that because there's very minimal chances for error with that, just the fewer connections you have and all that kind of thing. But because of that, now I've helped out with other podcasts. So I'm the project manager, content manager of one podcast that just launched, and then I'm also got invited. Now I'm hosting with another friend who has a parenting podcast. And yeah, we just did, I've been doing that for several months now, but yeah, Monday we just recorded 3, and we were all in the same room. We all had our own microphones plugged into one interface that then goes in the computer. But yeah, there were 4 of us all recording, and they're definitely, when I was editing it, I was kind of frustrated with some of the echo that we had, but So I can kind of speak to all those things. But yeah, now, so it's grown from me just like, hey, I don't know. And I'm like literally taking like John Lee Dumas's like free, like how to start a podcast course.
Yeah, raise your hand if you took that, by the way.
Yeah.
Anyone else take that?
Yes.
Roland, okay.
Yeah, it's either that one or Pat Flynn's, you know.
Yeah, Pat Flynn. When I took them both, the thing that was frustrating for me was that a lot of the stuff was out of date. So like what I really needed help with was the tech piece. And I don't know if they've updated them since then, but when you go in, all the interfaces are different. And I was like, this is the one thing I really need is the tech stuff, and it's not right. Anyway.
So, but yeah, it's been kind of cool. So, I mean, I would definitely say over the last year, it's gone from an idea to, you know, launching a platform to now being extremely passionate about podcasting and just loving it.
It kind of catches you like by surprise, I think. And I want to hear from, we'll go to Marianne next, like just how, you know, I guess what impact podcasting has had on you. Cause I feel like in the interviews I've done with just a couple people over this month, talking about the impact, it's amazing how anyone I've talked to is like, I started this not knowing what would happen. And it was like, for me, it was like falling in love, like at first sight. Like I loved it from the moment I started it, and I didn't think I would. But everybody that I've talked to is kind of like, it becomes something bigger. And then I talked with Kevin Tomlinson today from the Wordslinger podcast, and we were talking about it being like gremlins, where like you start a podcast and then it gets wet and there's suddenly like 50 of them, you know, that you start. So they tend to multiply. But Marianne, I'd love to hear from you what the impact of starting a podcast has had on you and kind of your brand or your personal life even.
Yeah. So, I mean, I fell in love with it right away. That first Google Hangout I did with my sister, I was like, yep, I'm home. I love it, you know? And I just want to share it really quickly. A friend of mine, he has a pretty big podcast now, but when he first started, he asked me on, and I'm like, no, I can't. I have an accent. Nobody can understand me. And now I'm like, blah, 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 and just really loving podcasting. And we get a lot of feedback, which is positive. So I'm sticking with it. But I think what Roland said, it's reaching out to people and being able to say, hey, I have a podcast. Do you want to come on? I have interviewed my heroes. You know, they're people I would not have access to otherwise, and have met so many cool and interesting people. And you almost build like a little family, you know, people you have interviewed to become kind of part of your surroundings. Not all of them, obviously, but a lot of people just become almost like friends. And the relationship with my co-host certainly is that I have a new friend, but also I have learned so much on the tech side. I met Kristen through podcasting by listening to a podcast, and that led me to the creative writing community. And even though I'm really slow with all of that, I feel it's opening another field for me of, you know, going into and actually building somewhat of a business. That said, podcasting is, you know, when you listen to John Lee Dumas and he's making what, $1 million every day type of essay, you know, people get in and thinking, oh, podcasting does it. It doesn't. It's more a labor of love, but it just has opened so many learning experience and friendship experience, and also plans for the future. And you're right. I mean, I always have to keep myself back from saying, oh, that could be another podcast or that could be another one. But it's like, yeah, it takes time to produce a good one. So yeah. Does it answer your question, or you want to hear more?
No, that's great. And I love what you said about getting to talk to your heroes, because I do think podcasting in a way that most other things aren't able to do as well, like, you know, it's able to get you in the door. I mean, I've only had, I'm trying to think if I even had somebody say no. I think I didn't have somebody say no. I had somebody write back with some kind of question where I was like, yeah, they're not a fit. Like they had their assistant write back and were like, give us a spreadsheet with all your numbers. And I was like, no, not because my numbers, like I was embarrassed of them, but I've kind of felt like I've interviewed people that are bigger than you. And if you, at your size, like I understand we have to guard our time, but if you, for your size, are trying to vet me and you don't have time, then I'd rather just go with somebody who has the time. And so I never even wrote back. But that's like the only person. Everybody else has said yes, or we've had scheduling conflicts sometimes. But yeah, it's amazing how many people they don't ask. They don't ask how many people are in your audience. They don't ask for any kind of thing. They're just like, sure, I'll get on a call with you. It's kind of crazy. So Roland, I'd love to, or actually let's go back to Matt because I wanted to do that order. But Matt, what impact has it had on you to start a podcast? And then we'll go to Roland.
Yeah. I would say, did I unmute my microphone? Okay, good.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, good. Oh man, what effect? Well, I mean, definitely it's been awesome. As I said, it was getting very stressful to do the videos, so much where it was like, it wasn't so much, honestly, it wasn't really a question of videos or podcasting. It was like, can I figure out podcasting, or am I going to shut it down altogether? Because I don't know that I can continue doing this. And so it's kind of saved that one of the dreams that I had, one of the focuses that I had and the passions that I have for the One Verse devotional. And now it's kind of expanded. I mean, I've had, much more podcast growth than I ever did video growth. And so it's not all about the growth, but something that I didn't really want to see die. It's given me an opportunity. And even some of the people that I, consult with, for example, I mentioned kind of being the project manager for one podcast. I mean, we just had a conversation. He was struggling. Like, he has a cool message to share. He's a communicator, but he does not like to write. He doesn't like to blog post. And so he was so inconsistent with it because it was just like pulling teeth. And then he knocked out. I mean, he's passionate right now. He's excited about it. So it's a little bit easier, but still he knocked out 3 or 4 episodes in one day. And I, wrote him a message and I was like, hey, could you imagine, doing, a month's worth of podcasts or blog posts in the same time? And he was like, never. He's like, no way. He's like, I can never do that. And so just to hear that energy. So I think podcasting can really help people that feel like, well, I have to have a message out there. I have to have a platform. But I guess I got a blog, even though I hate writing. Because blogging is just the thing. So that's part of it, is that it helped me to keep a platform and a message going that I didn't know if I was going to be able to. So that's been really cool. The flip side of that coin would be, even though I don't get flooded with emails all the time, actually, I just pulled one up because I need to write them back. And I was like, oh, it made me think of this, thinking through this question. I'm like, I got to write that person back. But just, got an email not too long ago, and I get emails or, comments through Facebook or private Facebook messages. And especially, I mean, well, I wouldn't say it's just my area of faith. I mean, whatever niche that we're in, where you're trying to help people. So Kirsten, for you, trying to help people learn how to write and build platforms and email lists. I know it's really cool for you. I mean, you've shared these stories when, you've been able to help people. I can imagine for Roland, if he helps someone succeed with health and their health life, and Marianne with living a sustainable life and those types of things, it's cool to hear those stories back. And so for me too, when someone's like, hey, I was struggling with this, or man, I just had someone in real life come up to me that knew of my podcast, who were not really friends, were just like very loose acquaintances, and they're just like, I got to tell you, like, I'm kind of between jobs right now. And like, your podcast has really given me a lot of hope, and I listen every day. And just hearing those stories and the impact that you're making in people's lives, because we're not doing it for the money. I mean, I have not monetized my podcast yet. I don't know if we're going to get into that. I have, not yet. Purposely, I haven't yet. I know when and where I want to get to and how I want to do it. And especially for me personally, it's a little bit different, because if I had like a 30-minute, podcast, then I could do, a mid-roll or something like that. But I with a 5-minute podcast, I don't want to take, a minute of my time running an ad. So I'm not doing it for the money, and most of us are not. And so I think the impact has been, when you see the impact that you're having on people's lives, there's something about audio. I mean, words are powerful. We know words are powerful. So the written word obviously is powerful, but there's something about when I'll put it this way, when someone allows you, the permission to speak right into their ears, there's something very intimate with that and very powerful. And so when you're able to share a little bit of your life or your message and what you want to share with the world, and someone saying, yes, I'll listen to you while I'm working out, or on my way to work or on my way home from work, like that's a powerful thing. And that's one thing, just for a piece of advice is, and I tell anyone this I can, is when you do your podcast, don't set, like if I listen to a podcast and they're like, and they address me as the listener, I usually never listen to that podcast again. Don't be like, listener, I want to tell you a story. You know what I mean? Like, oh, that's so horrible. Like, I want podcasts to feel like it's just me and you. And so, or at least a small group of people. And so that's the other thing I love about podcasting is just how personal and intimate it can be. Yes, it's a one-to-many platform, but it really should feel like a one-to-one or 1 to 2 or 3 platform. It was another piece of advice that I think just kind of fits into this. I want to say I think it was Dre from the Badass Solopreneur. I want to say it was her advice where she said, think about where your podcast or where your really it works for any platform, but where your platform would live in real life. And so for her, she said, my platform is a cocktail party. So she can use some F-bombs and some swears and stuff like that, but I think that helps you to think through. So when I think of mine, I either think of, hey, we're at a coffee shop and it's just you and me over a nice, cappuccino and we're talking about life. Or I invited you to my house and we're sitting in my living room. Once again, we probably have a nice hot cup of coffee and we're just talking about life. And when you have that in your head, I think it really frames up your podcast. Now, I know we're not necessarily giving advice or whatever, but I just wanted to share that because that feeds into, I think, the impact that it's had on me is because that personal relationship, again, like you said, making friends and impacting people solely through the internet, is kind of crazy. I mean, it's wonderfully crazy now. 10 years ago, it literally would have been like certifiably crazy, but now it's really awesome. The last thing I'll say about that is, and I pulled this up. I don't know if I saw the number, but it's crazy how many, podcasting, I'll just put a big plug out for it because there are millions. I think I've even heard over 1 billion blogs out there. And there's really only, now this was, I think in 2015, iTunes reported like 250,000 podcasts, and it's actually much lower than that for active podcasts. I think I've even heard as low as, like 60 something thousand podcasts are what are actually active in iTunes. And so when you're talking about growing a platform and reaching an audience, I mean, podcasting is by far the greatest way to really make an impact and find an audience. And so that's how it impacts me and also how I think, podcasting kind of impacts other people. So it's crazy that there's not really that many podcasts because honestly, here's the secret to podcasting. All right. And I just know this after doing 300 plus episodes. The secret to podcasting is don't quit. Like it's just to stick it out. It really is because so many people get really excited about it, but there's a little bit of a learning curve and they have to buy the tech and they got to get the microphone and whatever. And they get so pumped and then they realize it's a lot of work and they go for a month or two. And most podcasts don't go past I think it's 8 or 12 episodes and they're done. Matter of fact, there's a really popular blogger who started a podcast and I was listening a couple weeks ago and he's like, hey, we decided to shut down the podcast. And I'm like, there's another one that couldn't hack it after 6 months. I'm not trying, that sounds mean. I'm not trying to sound mean at all. I promise. He has a great blog. I love his blog. He has some great advice. I thought his podcast was pretty solid, but it wasn't getting the traction that he thought it should get quickly enough. And he just kind of was like, hey, it's not my baby. He said something to that fact that I heard some great advice from Kirsten this week about, not dropping babies. And he decided that was a baby he was willing to drop. So, but it gave me hope because I'm like, I'm telling you, if you want to make it as a podcaster, here's my strategy for podcasting is I'm going to be around longer than anyone else. So eventually I'm going to have a decent audience.
Does this make you like the cockroach of podcasting? Can we call you that now? You're just not going to, or like Twinkie?
Onward. No, I was not going to go that way with it.
You're never going to die. I was thinking nuclear explosions, and your podcast is just going to keep on going. Sorry, I took it in the direction
I will be here long after the computers and the robots take over.
I suck less, and I'm going to be around a little bit longer.
Absolutely. Well, I love a lot of the things that you said, but I want to give Roland a chance, and then maybe we can kind of pick apart or talk about some of these. But the impact, I think you're so right. And that's one of the things that really got me diving into podcasting was the lower sort of numbers and the competition. Now, I will say that I thought it was like, okay, cool. So I'm just going to like blow up immediately. No, that didn't happen either. But like you said, just sticking around and not quitting. And there's actually a term for that, which I didn't hear about until a couple of months ago, called pod fading. And that's like a thing that they call it. But like there's like the pod fade effect when people just give up and die. And it was super frustrating to me when I first started listening to podcasts and I wasn't paying attention to dates, and I'd like fall in love with a podcast. And then I realized like it ended 2 years ago. And I was listening to like these old archives and I was like, why did you stop? So
the last one's on a cliffhanger. Like, oh, I can't wait to see next week.
It's kind of like all those sitcoms that get canceled. So
here's my pet peeve is, I don't know if anyone else does this, but I'll go into iTunes and search for a couple like keywords to see where like, they don't really have rankings, but I'll kind of search for a keyword and kind of see where I show up in the list. And I'll have like podcasts that like, I actually do pretty well. I won't lie. I'm actually pretty happy about it, but I'll have podcasts that like beat me and they haven't like posted since like 2013. I'm like, come on, iTunes. Like,
iTunes is really an enigma. Like we just can't, we're not going to win with iTunes.
It's crazy, but I get so frustrated with that. I'm sorry. I want to hear Roland's story too, but that was just
so let's get to Roland's impact, but there are a lot of good things said. And I think, it's fun. Like, it's just really fun talking to you guys. I'll just say that as an aside in the middle. So if anybody listening is like, if you're feeling that like burning within you, like you've got to at least give it a try. But just talking to other people who are podcasting and love it and seeing the impact, it's refreshing and energizing. So Roland, let's hear about kind of what impact this has had on your life and your business and all of that.
Even a health coach needs a coach, right? So one of the things that it's really sort of inspiring and it keeps you on track. Like ours is not, we don't have a video podcast. It's no YouTube channel to speak of. My wife's really good on camera and she's on camera like every day with her clients and making videos and courses and things like that. But I'm more comfortable just talking or behind the keyboard. But just interviewing these people and just talking about these things and putting it out there really invigorates me and keeps me, I wouldn't say accountable, because it makes me so interested to try these new things. So like if I interview somebody, we interviewed Dan Pardee, who's a sleep researcher, and he talked about, the blue light issue and the cool yellow goggles and turning off your electronics an hour before bed, all those types of things. And it really set us off on a sort of a self-experimentation track to see how more sleep and better sleep could affect the rest of our lives. And it's dramatic. And the same thing happened with, changing up the way we eat, or early on getting rid of, we don't have a couch. We have a lot of floor pillows and we do have a dining room table, but most of the time we sit like sort of Japanese style on a low table on the floor. And like all of these things just sort of change our life. And it sort of inspired us we'd already written a couple of books at this point, but it inspired us on our latest book, which is, Eat Well, Move Well, Live Well, 52 Ways to Feel Better in a Week. So each one is just a little opportunity. So we went back to some of these people we'd interviewed. Dan Pardee, we interviewed him again and used him in the book, and Dr. Spencer Nadolsky, who was kind enough to write the foreword to our book. All of these people who we've met over the years, they've always inspired us in these different ways. And we wanted to distill this down, take the stuff that we had been learning in our podcast and distill it down into like little chunks that people could take away. And, we took away a lot of it along the way. So it was really powerful in that regard. So it's, if I don't know if anybody, I don't know, I haven't talked about it on this particular here, but if you're in the group, you probably know that I used to be very overweight. I was fat. I've lost, back in 2003, I lost over 100 pounds, and I've kept it off ever since. And there are times when it's not hard to keep it off, but it's not easy to stay as fit as I can be. Like I have to constantly remind myself and coach myself, so like just doing the stuff in the fitness and the health and the wellness industry, and just talking about these things that I'm passionate about. Really, it's sort of a circular argument in a sense, but talking about these things that I'm passionate about makes me more passionate about them. It makes me want to learn more and help more people and get my message out. And like Matt was saying about the number in the group, like I don't even know how many downloads I have. Like you guys seem like you went with the fancy way of setting up the podcast and going with Libsyn, which is definitely the easy way, right? But I'm like a tech guy. I'm like a tech guy from way back in the day. I started with an Apple IIe, and grew up on mainframe computers where there's no mouse, any of that kind of stuff. It's just all typing. And so when I heard Cliff Ravenscroft, the podcast Answer Man, on another podcast at one point, I figured, you know what, I could do this podcast thing. And he talked about different ways to do it, and Libsyn was one of the ways, and there were other things to do it. So I just went out and figured out how to do my own RSS feed, how to host the file somewhere, and at the time we were primarily bloggers, so everything we did was blogging. So I wanted to have a blog that was also here's our podcast as well. So it was very important to me that I had a really nice looking blog post and the podcast was there. So they were tuned together, so we would cross pollinate each other. So people who would, hopefully, and I made a lot of callbacks in the podcast, come visit and there's an extra download or something like that you can get. So I did it the hard way, but
that's pretty cool though, that you know how to do that and like figured all that. So like, I'm like, oh yeah, I just watched the free podcast course. That's why you didn't raise your hand, because you knew all the tech pieces that would baffle us still. So yeah, that's pretty cool.
Although I will say that when something goes wrong, you guys have it easier, because you can just
call
Libsyn or Bluebelly or whatever it's called, or
Blueberry. Yeah.
Bluebelly would be a good one. It's like one of those
Bluebelly would be a good one. Yeah. Well, hey, so can you check your stats at all through how you have yours set up, or no? I mean, not that stats are all that.
I can see how many people subscribe, but not downloads. Okay. Like, so I use FeedBurner to generate the feeds, and most of you guys probably use FeedBurner for one thing or another, whether you know it or you don't. It's behind the scenes in a lot of things. So I can see the number of subscribers I have, but not the number of downloads. Okay. But it's surprising to me, and I'm considering changing to something else where I can start to get the stats. But when you're focusing on the podcast from, it's just like an extra little tool, extra little service to your audience, it's like, I don't know. It's like part of me just wants to be happy to produce the podcast. But at some point, I think like maybe I will want to know.
Yeah, so, well, I love, not to do a huge plug for Libsyn, but I'm a huge fan of theirs for a couple of reasons. But, they do the stats. I really don't keep up very often. Like I've heard people talk about how they check a couple times a day, and I'm like, what is wrong with you? Although if you guys do that, I'm sorry. Like, sorry, I just asked what was wrong with you. But, I do hear people doing that. But Libsyn makes it a lot easier to publish other places and to get into things like Google Play. You can actually email Rob Walsh himself and say, hey, I would love to get into Spotify, and he will put in a plug for you. That doesn't mean you'll get in, but they can put you other places. So there's a lot of power behind Libsyn. And I like that they have their podcast, The Feed, which is one of my favorite things to listen to as a podcaster. And it's super nerdy. So if you're just starting out, you may not want to go there yet, because your mind might just, because it's like the super deep dive, like, I don't know if you guys listen to The Feed or not, but it's like super deep dive nerd podcasting stuff. So anyway, I just like that they have that for their podcasters. They do talk about numbers and kind of the overall average for Libsyn and other things. So I'm not an affiliate for them. I just really like them. But if you do switch, like there's some other benefits there too that are pretty cool. So yeah, well, I want to move into kind of practical. So were you done talking about benefit stuff? I don't want to cut you off talking about Libsyn.
Well, I think that was pretty much it. But like you said, if we're going to talk about some of the pros and cons or some of the considerations for podcasting later, I can go into more of that. But
let's do that now. We're going to talk about tips and tools. So if you want to go ahead and we'll segue you, and then we'll go to somebody else if you want to do that.
Sure. Well, I'll branch off a little bit on what I was talking about. Like I did it the hard way, and you were talking about Spotify and Google Play and things like that. We're in all those things, but you have to submit them individually, and that's just your feed. So like you only have to submit it once. Like once you're signed up, it's all automatic after that. So like I post our podcast episode and it automatically gets distributed to Google Play, Spotify, iTunes, a couple other things. So it's there, but you had to figure out how to do it on each one of those things, where some of these services will do it automatically. Also, if you don't want to do a fancy blog post around something, you can put it up on Libsyn and it just goes live, and then you can do your show notes and things like that later. And you can even, you can do it right there on Libsyn. Libsyn gives you like a little place where you can put that information in there. And my biggest issue with Libsyn is if you want to share it on Facebook and you don't have your own page on your place to put a picture, there's no featured image, things like that. So it just shows up as a Libsyn link, not as your podcast link. So it doesn't look very pretty on Facebook or Twitter. So that's the biggest beef with them. But I think a lot of podcasters who use it don't realize that that's a thing. They don't realize that they if they want to post on Facebook, that it doesn't look very good when they just share the Libsyn link.
Yeah, it doesn't have, I know exactly what you're talking about. Like it doesn't have the nice like blog post image and the things like that will come if it's like, and I've tried different things. It's been interesting. I've experimented with sharing the direct download link to Libsyn, which doesn't look pretty. And I've tried sharing, like I make really pretty images for the blog posts, and I've tried sharing just the blog post with the embedded podcast in there. And I've had better results with the direct download that's ugly. But, that's because also Facebook, you can't now. You used to be able to listen right in Facebook. You could just push the button and listen. You can't do that now. Facebook was like, nope, we're not doing that. But Twitter, you still can. And so I think it looks the best if you actually pin like your latest episode. If you pin it to the top tweet, it shows up a little bit prettier, but people can listen right there. So usually my newest episode, I'll pin to the top until the next week, and then I'll pin another one. But it's funny to me because I'm the same way. And I don't know if it's like that people listening to podcasts don't care as much about it. I don't know. I've got a lot to learn about that. And like, I'm still curious, like who's listening and not. And I have a lot of people in my audience who are like, I'm never going to listen to your podcast because I'm not into podcasts. And I'm like,
I think it's also weird. Like, I think it depends on your audience, but like a lot of our audience doesn't know what a podcast is. So we'll send them to the link on our website, and they press the player there, and they just listen, and they're like, "Oh, I'm just listening to you guys talk," and they don't know that it's a podcast. And when we say, "Well, you can like go walk around out in the neighborhood or walk your dog while you're listening," they're like, "Well, I don't know. How's that going to happen? Like, I'm going to have to stream it, go to your thing from there?" I go, "No, just subscribe." And they're like, my head's going to explode. So I know that Libsyn also has that feature where it will create a YouTube video, right? And it will post it on your YouTube channel. So I don't know whether that's good or bad. We've been considering taking our content and putting maybe some simple slides in there or just one image and just doing it on YouTube, because some of our listeners say it would be so much easier if they could just go to YouTube and press play, even though we don't really want them to watch it. There's nothing to watch. But I don't think they're sitting there staring at their computer, but they're like in the kitchen, they're doing stuff, and they're listening to it that way. I wonder if Libsyn would have something, or you could download that Facebook video after they publish it, and you could upload that to Facebook, and then people they could play that.
I have my so mine goes automatically to YouTube, which automatically then goes to Facebook, still through Libsyn. And I do have actually a really good reach on the YouTube video in Facebook, which isn't supposed to work, but it actually has worked okay. And some people have told me they found me through YouTube, even though I'm only getting like 12 to 15 watches. There's nothing to watch again on YouTube. I'm still getting some people who find me there. So, anywhere else you can be for discoverability is good. So I do like that option, but like I like to try to put them into a playlist so that if people come to my channel, like I don't have a big channel, but it's something I'm thinking about growing. I don't want them to come there and see like the first 15 videos all be like the thumbnail for my podcast, because that looks real stupid. So I try to put them in a playlist and then push it down. So like if someone's searching a term, they might find that episode, but if they come to my channel, they're not going to see a bunch of like dumb looking video thumbnails.
So I want to jump in, Sarah, because Libsyn actually, since we're talking Libsyn, they just started a new website for you. So basically you can put pictures now and everything, and it shows up much nicer. And then for YouTube, you can create a graphic and upload that for each episode. So I do that, so each episode.
Which I keep forgetting until I'm in there uploading, and I'm like, dang it, I didn't make that again. And then it's always like midnight, and I'm like, press and publish anyway. But
yeah.
But maybe you could just use your featured image.
Well, the featured image, like mine is square. So anyway, yeah, I just need to take that extra step. It wouldn't be hard. I just forget. So I need to make like a note in my workflow, but my workflow's in my head. And right now it's not accepting new notes. So
that head.
Well, let's do Roland, I want to talk about tips and kind of tools or what, suggestions you would have. Do you have any more any kind of things that you would suggest to people who are just starting out, or even maybe somebody who's like a newbie or just trying to get traction with their podcast?
Yes, I would say that a lot of people are really focused on things that probably don't matter as much as they think. Like, I got to pick the music that people are going to love. I got to have this great logo. Like, no one cares about a logo. Like, you barely even see it. Like, where, you might see it in iTunes, but sometimes it's on your phone and sometimes it's not. Sometimes the featured image shows up as a replacement for the logo. Like, I don't even know why, the science behind that. But they don't do their podcast because they're worried about these things. Or they're also worried about editing, or like, how are we going to do the fade the music in, fade the music out, and should I have a sponsor, and like way cart before the horse things. And they haven't even decided whether they can hit that 7, 8, or 12 episodes. So it becomes sort of a thing, and as they're doing it, they can become frustrated. So I think that's the big test is, can you do 7 or 8 episodes, and do you enjoy it, and can you get them out? And if you can, then you can sort of work through these things later. I mean, the dirty little secret is you can even go back and add your music retroactively. I mean, you could take your upload and re-upload the file and replace the old file. And I mean, people make mistakes and cut things out or change the sound quality and all those things. You could add that later, but probably you don't have to, because very few people go back and listen to all your shows from the beginning, unless you're some sort of a fiction podcast, because even though we try to do stuff that is evergreen or timely, we try to do stuff that's timely. Like, you do a match of both, but like after a couple of years, a lot of that stuff, like no one's going to go catch up on that stuff. Very few, because the stuff is outdated by then. Yeah,
and you're always kind of horrified if somebody does. And like, I started with episode 1 and everybody's like, no, everything was bad then. Like, go forward 50 episodes. Like, I see that a lot.
Yeah, like we have certain people that we interviewed way back then. So people might go, like those people's fans might go and listen to them, and but they weren't bad. They were just, people know this was our first episode and it sounds different. We didn't have music back then. We just cut right in. Somewhere along the way, I think our music changed, and then we picked some other music, and we're about ready to pick our third batch of music now that we sort of rebranding everything. Yeah, it's just don't overthink it. See if you can do it first and perfect it later.
That's great advice. Like, I was like, who quoted that? Well, everybody, just start, like, don't wait till it's perfect. Just get it out there, and you're going to grow along the way. And that's part of the thing. Like when I first started, I was so impressed with myself that I could edit my audio. And then I think I'd just been listening on the computer. And then when I actually like put in headphones, I was horrified. I was like, wow, this is not what I thought it sounded like at all. And I had this moment of like horror. And so, and then I hired an editor, and then I learned to do it myself and fired my editor. And so, cause I don't like paying for things, not because, no, I guess I am a control freak too. So yeah, that too. But no, I love that. Just, not letting the things get in the way. Well, Marianne, let's do some tips, and, if you have tools or whatever that you recommend, that's fine too, but just tips and best practices. And then we'll go to Matt to kind of finish this out.
Yeah, I wanted to speak to what Roland said. That was actually an advice we got from kind of a big podcaster when we were about to start, and he said, just do it. And his take was, if you sound so good from the beginning, people don't think you're for real. It's good to have first episodes where not so good, and then you grow and you get better. People believe you more. You're not a big organization being all flashy and doing this podcast. So we just did it. I think as tools goes, if you don't have a microphone, this is what a lot of people are saying. It's actually sometimes better to use your iPhone if you have one of those. And I think even Android phones have pretty good microphones built in, the newer models. So they're often better than your built-in the computer sound-wise. And what else? Have a workflow written down somewhere, which is not in your head and doesn't accept new steps. That really helped me, because I tend to keep things in my head a lot too. And then it creates stress because you're like, okay, did I do this? Did I do that? So with time, I kind of try to write it down. And didn't you send out the workflowy thing, Kristen? It's like a bullet type of thing where you can just really go, okay, boom, 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 need to do the graphic, do this, do that, do this, So I think that really helps to get it out of your head and just kind of get it to be a routine, and then not to stress too much, Because I still spend probably way more time on each episode than I should, or if there's a should, but I'm stepping more and more into, okay, we are indie podcasters. We don't have a whole team of sound engineers and this and this and this and this. So we're not going to sound like somebody who has a whole sound studio and has 10 people helping, and it's more about the message than about the fancy tech. Or you want to sound good enough that it doesn't hurt people's ears, when they listen. But it doesn't have to be perfect. So that's my tip. Do it.
I love that. Very
and, and if you find you love it, then it's the time to invest time, money into buying better tools, taking more classes, and with time, a lot more information comes your way. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I love that advice too. Like even just saying like you could be as simple as using your phone, which does have a much better mic than the one built into your computer. But it doesn't have to be super expensive. Like I'm still using the same setup I used. I got this boom arm for $10 on Amazon. So like that's the only new thing I have. Everything else I got over 2 years ago, and it was like $100 or less for all my equipment. And I'm still using the same stuff. So, I think that cost is really, some people looking like, oh my gosh, I spend that on a mic. Yeah, like maybe not the first time. Although I will say now that I have a mic, I use it all the time. And so having the power of having an actual microphone, and again, this one was like $60, so it's not breaking the bank, but there are just tons of uses for it. So I think it's a really good investment. And you can always sell it like on your local neighborhood Facebook group where they sell everything. So if you really hate it and don't like it, I think it's, you don't have to go crazy is all I'm saying. You don't have to go buy all the crazy equipment and everything else at first. You can be really simple and really streamlined with it. So great advice. Matt, do you want to finish us out with you've given us some great advice already, but any advice you want to leave people with?
Well, specifically on tech and stuff, or just
any of it? Yeah, any of it.
Okay. I would say some great advice already to just get started. I would slightly disagree in one area, but I still want you to have the filter of to just get started. And that would be, I do think your image does matter, because I just know that I judge podcasts on if I go to iTunes and they just have the little like iTunes symbol, like I'm probably not going to listen to that podcast. I don't necessarily judge though on if it's the most professional looking one, because I know, like Marianne said, we're all indie podcasters. So we're all just trying to figure it out. But I think if you go and you look at some of the better podcasts, it can even be simple, like a good headshot of yourself with like a block lettering of what your podcast is. Make the text as large as possible so they can see your title when it's a thumbnail. It doesn't have to be overly complicated. Matter of fact, I would say the less complicated, the better. So a very simple design, either one image of yourself or one logo type thing. But I think that is kind of important, just because it does send some, professionalism. I don't know if this would answer Roland's issue earlier, but one key piece of, I guess it would be tech, because you have to buy it. It's a $30 I think it's a $30 program. It might only be a $15 program, but get something. And really, Libsyn actually will do this in the in your, when you add new content. I do it separately, but get a program that you can add your ID3 tags. And so if you get a program to add your tags to it, that is your ID3 tags. And it's not just a podcasting thing, it's any digital music. So when you open up your iTunes and say you're just playing a Bruno Mars CD and it says artist Bruno Mars and it has the title of the track and some other information, or like what year it was published, those are ID3 tags. And actually, as podcasters, we can do that same stuff for, I don't even think it's the 30, I think it's $15.
It's free with Audacity.
Okay, yeah, I was like, I don't think I paid for
okay.
mine, but it was 2 years ago, so I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, when I save mine out, I just save it with a free
you
Audacity.
can do an Audacity too. I bought a program that I can do a little bit. I have a little bit more, but in that I like add my cover art. So even though I do it within Libsyn, so for example, my podcast app that I use, I hate the iTunes podcast app. It sucks. I don't like it at all, but I use Overcast. Is what you can't see it on my phone, but I use a program called Overcast. Well, it actually doesn't pull from iTunes or anything. It uses the podcast directories. And so sometimes I've even had a podcast that in iTunes, he has his artwork and stuff, but in Overcast, his artwork doesn't show up. And I was like, that dude's not doing his ID3 tags. So that can be one thing, because then that attaches it actually to the MP3 file. Another kind of technical point, always do your files in MP3, whether you use a Mac or a PC. A podcast needs to be in MP3. And a lot of this information you can find online, but I think every person that's on this podcast right now, I can't see what Roland's using, but it looks like Marianne as well. I think we all have Audio-Technica ATR 2100s. Those are one of the go-to microphones for, indie podcasters and really ones that are starting out. I think I have it pulled up right now on Amazon.
It was $67 earlier today.
Yeah, $67 right now on Amazon. I think I even got mine for like $50 less than that when like there was a sale on or whatever. And this mic is amazing. It can plug in an XLR input or through a USB interface right to your computer. So I love that. It has I can even plug in headphones right into my mic, so it sounds great. And then I have just a windscreen on mine, $4 I think, or like $3, $2.95. Or like Marianne has, looks like you have a nicer, like a $10 pop filter, but you want to get those things out.
I like yours better. This one falls off ever so
I had that too. It fell off in the middle of an interview, and I was like, and we're done. I broke up with that one and got the little guy. It doesn't work quite as well, but it doesn't fall off during interviews. So
yeah, there you go.
So little things.
So those are a few technical things. I would say with the conversation about Libsyn earlier, and I even pulled mine up because I'm like, that doesn't quite sound right. But I was glad that Roland mentioned about, yes, for now for YouTube, you can set up a YouTube or it will create a video. Instead of sharing that back to Facebook, and I have it pulled up right here, if you create a Facebook on publish is what Libsyn calls it, they have it where you can say upload as a video to your timeline. So it'll actually upload, and that's what I do. And so
that's what I have going then. It's not from YouTube. Okay,
so
that's why it has reach.
One, because Facebook will kill that. They don't like it when you try to share.
That's why I was surprised. So, okay, that makes so much more sense.
So when you do that, it actually uploads a native, Facebook video. And, I would say kind of what Kirsten was saying earlier, if you could really what Roland was saying earlier, I do the same thing, buddy. I don't let Libsyn. I set up a few destinations in Libsyn, but when I do iTunes, when I do Stitcher, when I do Google Play, I go to those manually and submit my RSS feed through all of those. So I kind of have a little bit more control over it or know what's going on with my podcast. And you can just do searches for like how to submit to Google Play Music, and it'll come up, and you just sign in with your Google account, if you have a Gmail or whatever, and just give them this. It's always the same RSS feed. It's like, the name of your, podcast, whatever you created, and then like ours is like .libsyn.rss or, whatever /RSS. And that's how you do it. There's something else I was going to say with that, and I forget.
While you're thinking about, I was going to go back to the podcast artwork, because I think, yes, just get started, but I also think the podcast artwork is important. But the thing that's cool about it is, like you're saying, it doesn't have to be, it actually should be very simple. And I think about Aaron Mahnke from Lore and his podcast. And, again, when he started, he didn't know what was going to happen to his podcast, right? If you guys listen to Lore, like, he started it as a way to promote his fiction books, and it became its own thing. It's getting its own TV show. It's huge. His logo is literally a black square. And I know the font because I used to use it. It's free in PicMonkey, and it's called Amiatic. And I used to use it for like all my blog images, and it just says Lore in the middle. That's it.
Is it really a free?
Yeah, it's totally free. He probably did slap it up in PicMonkey because it's a free font. It's a black square. The end. Yep. And it's so powerful because people associate. Now, he hasn't changed it, even though he's like big time, or at least the last time I looked, it wasn't different. But readable. Like, I see people all the time. Marianne and I both have the benefit of being ladies, so we can be in the She Podcasts group, which is a fantastic. I'm sure there's some dude podcast groups, but She Podcast is awesome. And a lot of people will be like, "Here's my new artwork. What do you think?" And it's like 18 words. And I'm like, no, like, no one can read that, because you need to, like, it's almost like you have to, like, when you're creating your podcast artwork, it's like you need to minimize it so it's that tiny size that people will see on their computer and your phone. Like, I do use the iPhone podcast app. I don't know any different, so I still like it. And I don't want to switch because then I'll be sad and have to use something else. But for now, it's fine for me. But it's a little bigger there. But still, if you go into iTunes, it's tiny. So, like, it has to be short words, very huge. But yeah, it can be super, super simple. But we are visual people, so it does matter. So when I created mine, and I just did it myself, I didn't hire a designer. I'm okay with design stuff, but I'm not a designer. I just went and looked at iTunes and was like, what will stand out and be readable? And I think, I changed my artwork. I was like, I love this. And then I was like, no, I hate it. And so I changed it. And I think it's much better now.
Kirsten had a long, drawn out thought process, and she thought, what is going to work? Shark head.
Yeah. Well, you know what? There was some thought process behind that, but
I know there was.
There was. I'm actually thinking about changing my profile pic. Maybe not my podcast artwork. To me, my kids just got this giant pillow that's a donut with sprinkles. So we may be getting some new profile pics. Probably not the podcast change, but we may go from shark hoodie to donut head. So anyway, back to you. Did you think about what you forgot in the meantime?
Oh, we just totally kind of moved on or whatever. So,
well, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I have my microphone. I don't have the same microphone you guys have. I have a Samson Go mic, which is my wife and I, we travel a lot. So a lot of times we do the podcast wherever, in a hotel room or something like that. So it's a very small, it's sort of highly rated for podcasters. And our plan originally was to use this and then add a bigger setup once we got going. And we've just been stuck. We've just not been stuck. We have stuck with this microphone ever since. And there was one episode where we borrowed somebody's fancier microphone, and it sounded close enough so it wasn't really worth changing things up.
Awesome. Well, there was a question in the chat from Stephanie, and it kicked her name out of chat. Chatango does that sometimes, Stephanie. I'm sorry. But she was asking if there was a step-by-step blog or course to get started. We all mentioned John Lee Dumas's free course. It's like the free podcast course, and Pat Flynn has one as well. This month's, all the content from this month is from our paid community is going to be going into like a mini course. And so that, my hope is, will be kind of my answer to that, a little bit different setup than how they have theirs. And so, yeah, if you have anything that you think is missing once this month is up, then you can tell me and I can plug it in there. Because this, like, conversations like this, I think are important and lacking from when you start a podcast. So like if you take one of those free courses, and I want to hear from you guys if you have any suggestions past those, but taking one of those courses, like when you take John Lee Dumas's course, you hear his perspective, which is you're going to make a bunch of money in your podcast. And that's kind of his thing. And that's not true for most people. And so I really was like, I told my husband, I was like, I'm starting this podcast. It's going to be my, I don't know what I've said, but it's going to be what brings in all the money. And now I'm like, yes, all the money. It's all coming through the podcast. It's brought tons of other things. It's had a huge impact on my business, on my connections, on all the different things, but it has not directly brought in very much money. I've had a couple sponsors, but like basically those sponsors paid for the person I hired to find sponsors for me because I don't have time. And I was like, well, that didn't really work out. It kind of just broke even there. So, you hear that one person's perspective. So I like this roundtable because you're getting to hear different niches of podcasts and different people's stories of what they feel. And I think that's really missing from the space of when you're starting a podcast, like the real talk. And this is like, I hope the real talk, but I want to put some tech in there too. But do you guys have any other suggestions for, if you're just getting started? Yeah, go ahead.
The She Podcast ladies have a free podcasting course. And, to be fair to John Lee Dumas, he does make his money out of other things. So the podcast is the vehicle to do, to sell his membership site and all sorts of different things. And probably that's, true a little bit for you too, said, the podcast gives you credibility. So that's another benefit of podcasting, that you become a public figure and that people hear your opinions, so just throwing that out real quick.
Yeah, and his training is good, but yeah, he does talk a lot about sponsorships. Like that's he makes that seem a lot easier. Like when I came out of that, I thought it would be pretty quick and easy to get sponsors, which I don't think is true. Roland, what were you going to say?
Well, if you are selling something, it's just I don't know if I don't know who originally said it, but my previous boss, who was a sales manager, said it. People buy things from people they like, right? And people they trust. So the more, and it takes, and my wife says it takes 7 touches before somebody is really willing to spend money with you, or even if it was something small. So the more opportunities you have to get in front of them and to talk about things that aren't selling, the more likely they are to trust you when it does come time to sell. So I would say that keep that in mind, and also don't be afraid to periodically sell, because if you have a podcast where you never sell or anything, and not even sell your services, or don't even send them back to your website to get something free or to get something inexpensive or to get something of somebody else's, when you finally do 25 episodes later, they're going to go, spammer, and they're going to be all upset. So you kind of have to set the stage. But they, once they like you, and like, if you can sit there and you can talk, you're talking to like a tiny audience, you're talking to a small group, you're talking to like in a cocktail party, like, it's that's an intimate situation, and people, the real you is going to come out. And the people who are going to be your biggest fans and they're going to love you the most are going to appreciate that.
Yeah. And I know that kind of to speak to that too, of talking about your own products and the touch points, I've heard the same thing for 7 times, listening to people talk about podcast sponsorships and how that is growing, because advertisers are just starting to realize the power. And I think that podcasting is showing that when sponsors do go through podcasts, that the response is greater than some of the other efforts and other places they're putting their money. And so that's really interesting. So like, if you're thinking about that for yourself, like I have things, that I'm doing and I can't necessarily track it. Like there's no pixel for like who listened to my podcast and then bought my course. But like, I'm sure the impact is greater there too. Like you're saying, that people are liking and trusting you. So it can be really a good vehicle for that. But like, just in terms of maybe the direct revenue is more where it's like, okay, the direct revenue, like I get paid to podcast. That's not so much. I mean, that's kind of the dream, but that's not always a reality. But also it's not, because maybe you don't want a sponsor. I don't know.
Well, actually, yeah, I know you use pretty links, right? So like one of the ways that you can do is you could give a special pretty link that's easy, because the best thing about pretty link is that you can give them something that they can remember. So then when they get back to their type it on there, they have something they can remember. So if that is a unique thing just for the podcast, you don't mention it anywhere else, you can kind of track who goes back, and then you can keep statistics on who follow, on how many people come through different things. And you can even direct them to a page that's identical. You could have like multiple identical pages, that one's just for podcasting. And then so you can do these pixels on there to track people from different perspectives. It's just more work.
That's a good idea. I hadn't even thought about that. I like that. Awesome. Well, does anybody have any parting thoughts before we close it out? We did a lot of good talking, and I think gave people some pretty cool perspectives.
I do. And it's like, I would say that there's no shame in not being a podcaster, right? And not doing it. But I want you to realize that it's not super easy. Like, it may be easy to sit in front of the microphone and talk for half an hour or 5 minutes or an hour about what you want to talk about. But just realize that the other stuff is work. It takes time. Like, so even though like, oh, you add up all these things in your head and it doesn't take very much time, but you want to make a featured image for Facebook, that's one size. Then there's the podcast, there's a square for Instagram, then there's the sharing, and then there's all these different, then there's are you going to do show notes, right? And then there's links. Every time I'm going to put a link for that link in, you got to get the link, you got to type the text, it's all the stuff. And those things really add up. So what I would say is, and they also say that this kind of works well together, because they say that you should launch your podcast with 7 or 8 episodes already in the tank. So you can do this and record and produce 7 or 8 episodes before you even do all the hard work of paying for a host or things like that, because you can see whether you even like them, whether you like to do it. And if you don't, then you can host those episodes for your readers with just for they can read like that without having to go through all the work and the expense of creating the podcast. But if you find out that you really love it, now you have time to set up your Libsyn account, start creating all of those, perfecting the graphics. You can get your logo. You can put your beginning and your ending music perfectly on the end, and you can launch your podcast with 7 or 8 episodes ready to go. So when that person gets it in their feed, they go, "Oh, this person's serious. They've got 7 or 8 episodes. They're in this for the long haul."
That's great advice. I love that. No, that's fantastic. I love it. Anybody else? Parting thoughts?
Well, I kind of think, know your why. Why do you want to do that? Because if it's not some you're actually passionate about and really feel you want to bring that message out to the world, then it becomes work. And yes, there is very inspiring thought I have just left my head. So it's gone.
Maybe they got added to the list of things to do in my head by accident. There was like a transference there. Later on, I'm going to be like, oh, there it is. There's Mary Ann's thought.
Exactly.
That's kind of the way the internet works nowadays. Maybe actually in the future, but that's a whole other discussion. So,
oh, I do remember. I think if you become a podcaster, you need to be willing to become an advocate for podcasting as well. Because, I think we already mentioned it's actually growing. I think 50% of people now know what a podcast is. But I think as a podcaster, it's not just about ourselves, but we enter a community. And so we want to bring each other forward and, come from a space of we are in this together and not just me. That was my parting words here.
I love that too. I think that's really neat. And I saw that from you during the month they were doing like a tripod like Try Podcast, TRY, hashtag to try to kind of just get the message out there. And Marianne tagged me, and people were encouraged to tag each other, like to go try podcasts and stuff. And I think, you know, being in some podcast groups and going to Podcast Movement, which I think I'll actually get to meet Marianne and Roland in person. Woohoo! We'll have a little in-person party. You know, it is neat. It's neat to see the people like out and about, but also just to be supportive of the community. Cause yeah, it is, you know, and until I got an iPhone that had the podcast app on it, I was like, I don't understand what a podcast is. And I'm pretty tech savvy. Like I'm everywhere. I'm on all the platforms. I'm doing all the stuff, but like podcasts, I was like, where are they? Are they just like in the air, you know? And I feel really dumb now. I'm like, well, it's clear where they are, but now I really feel for those people who are like, I don't get it, because I didn't get it either until I had a phone with like, push the button. There they are. There are podcasts, you know? So, yeah, well, guys, I really appreciate you taking all this time that you did to do this roundtable and kind of share your experiences. I think that this is so valuable. And I know this is a whole other discussion, so don't respond even if you want to. But I think, you know, as an introvert, which I am, I need to go like hang out alone for a while, but I'm also super energized by talking to other people, especially about things that we're all passionate about. So it's really just exciting for me personally to get to talk to you guys about this. So thanks for sharing all of your podcast tips, tools, and stories with us.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's been great.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Awesome. Well, this replay will live on for a while on this page. And if you have any questions or follow-ups or anything else, you can direct them to me, or you can go over to the free creative writing community, which is at creativewriting.com/community. That's my pretty link there, to go right into our Facebook group where you can chat with all of these lovely people and ask more questions. So thank you guys for watching. And again, reach out if you have any podcast questions.